What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network. Today we're talking the fifth and final episode, for now anyway, of the WWE Ruthless Aggression show. So before we go any further with the episode itself, which was entitled Civil War, Raw vs. SmackDown, the show is over for now. So it was never specified how many more episodes there are. I assume 5, maybe 10 more. Probably 5. There were 5 so far. But yeah, the rest of the series is not airing until later on this year. I did not know that. Maybe that was already common knowledge. I know that there were 5 episodes on tap, dating back, a couple of weeks when they released the lineup for the show. But I assumed, they're only going to release the first 5, and the remainder of the series will be announced by the 4th or 5th episode. But no, it was announced on this episode at the very end. There was a promo that aired for the remainder of the series, not airing on the network until the fall, which sucks because I've enjoyed the show by and large. I'll get into this episode why it really wasn't anything all too eventful. But overall, I've liked the show, and it sucks they're waiting another at least 6 to 8 months to air the rest of it. It may not be until September. I mean, they said fall, and it's currently March. It's not even spring yet officially. So it may not be until September that we get the remainder of this series, which sucks. Just a bit of a heads up there. But this episode was all about Raw versus SmackDown, the brand split, the Civil War, as the title of the episode suggests, that is. I was really looking forward to this episode because I love the idea of the brand split. I love the brand split itself. Not exactly in execution. WWE, let's face it, has never done a great job of executing the brand split and having it live up to its full potential. But as you can only expect, this episode was filled with revisionist history. A lot of it was facts and shit, but to call it a success is true to a certain extent in some of the stars they created. But let's put it this way. There was a reason why the brand split failed and why they did away with the brand split. Why they got lazy with it and they eventually just did away with it altogether. I know that wasn't exactly the Ruthless Aggression era. It officially stopped in 2011, I think. But let's face it, it was dead well before then. The brand split was dead in the water, but I would say 2008. They started to waver a little bit. I would say the peak of the brand extension era was from 2002 to 2005. From 2005 to 2008, it was okay. Then by 2008, it was dead. They were having people switch shows at random constantly. By 2009, 2010, definitely by 2011, it was a complete fucking joke to have the brand split around. And again, I'm a major advocate of the brand extension. I think if we had the option to do one or to not do one, I say do one. With the amount of people they have on their roster today, it may not have worked 20, 30 years ago when it was a different type of roster. But nowadays, you need a brand split. I hate the idea that we don't need one because they have so many fucking people that are already not on TV. I think it would be way worse if Raw and SmackDown did not have distinct rosters. But anyway, we'll go in depth with everything that was covered on this episode momentarily. But I do want to note that, though. I just want to mention that they don't talk about the end of the brand split, why it didn't work, why they've since done it 2 or 3 other times. And again, I'm glad we have a brand split. I really am happy about that. But I thought it was a little wishy-washy for them to not mention, why it failed and all this other shit all the times they fucking crossed the brands. And they did talk about that very, very, very briefly on this episode when the brand split was first, started, when it first started in 2002. Other than one quick mention by Adam Cole or someone like that was never brought up again. So we'll get into it momentarily. But anyway, to kick off the episode, we hear from Vince McMahon, who discusses the idea of the brand extension, why he did it, and says that he talks about how it's important to take a half step back sometimes in order to take 2, 3, 4, 5, a million steps forward. So they kind of recap what we already know, what they've already discussed on this episode, or rather on this series so far, in regards to WCW already being purchased, and that they were kind of on autopilot creatively at the time. But they needed that aggressive edge, which is what kind of gave life to the Ruthless Aggression era. But at the same time, though, they already discussed a lot of this in that first episode of the show, because they brought up the brand split and the, splitting the rosters and everything else. But on this episode specifically, they talk about how on both shows, because they had SmackDown by 2002. It had been on the air for about 3 years by that point, but they were retelling the same stories on both shows. It's one thing if your stories are absolutely amazing and you can get away with it, but the issue is that when the years kind of went on, the stories got less exciting. You're seeing you're rather seeing more of the same people. It's becoming just overexposure and whatever else. It wasn't the Attitude Era anymore, so you can't really get away with doing that. Now the stars, now that there's a lot less star power, they felt more overexposed, and it just didn't work as well. You were seeing a lot of the same talent on both shows. And not only that, they had a large assembly of talent. They had one of the best rosters of all time at that point, coming out of the closure of WCW. At the same time, though, on that same token, they had the largest assembly of talent at any other point in the company's history. They had to figure out a way to manage all of the talent to ensure that people would still get opportunities, because people weren't going to break through unless they were given an opportunity. There was only so much television time, even between the two shows, for the main stars to get exposure. They had two shows, but they were featuring the same top stars from Raw on SmackDown. They were retelling the same stories. They were airing replays to kind of catch people up on what they missed 3 or 4 days earlier. It was becoming redundant. So, a brand extension draft was held on March 25th, 2002. The brands legitimately wanted to beat each other in the ratings, live events, everything else. They were becoming really competitive around this point. Becky Lynch, as a fan, growing up over in Ireland, was not happy about the brand split, only because selfishly she could only watch SmackDown. She only had, I don't think she had cable, but she could watch SmackDown, so she could not watch Raw. Some of her favorite stars were there, and she wasn't happy about it initially, but it made people, my mindset is, if I see Roman, I'm not a major Roman Reigns fan, but I like Roman Reigns. Let's use him as an example, or AJ Styles. I'm a big AJ Styles guy. If I already saw him on Raw, maybe if I'm that big of a fan, I'll want to watch what he's doing on SmackDown too. But, maybe not at this point, but definitely in 2015, pre the most recent brand split, they were kind of having everyone appear on both shows. If I already saw AJ on Raw, why would I want to see him do the exact same thing on SmackDown? I already got my fill of him. I won't want to tune into SmackDown. It's the same shit as we see on Raw. So who cares? Especially at a time when the shows aren't all that good. So if SmackDown is Raw light, who the hell cares? You know what I mean? But if you keep people exclusive to certain shows, I'm going to want to watch SmackDown for, AJ's not on SmackDown anymore. Who's on SmackDown now that I really like? I honestly don't even know. Daniel Bryan, for example. I'm a big Daniel Bryan guy. I'll watch SmackDown for Daniel Bryan, and I'll watch Raw for everyone else. I feel like Raw has most of my favorites right now. AJ Styles, the burial of Ricochet. I don't know. Everyone else that's on Raw right now. I think that just makes way more sense, at least in my opinion. So, anyway, fans were interested to see how it would play out. It was something that had never been done before at any other point in the company's history. They had a lot of star power, a lot of talent at other periods in the company's history, but never to the point where it was basically needed to have two separate shows with two distinct rosters. So it enabled the stars to shine. Bischoff was kind of to add fuel to the fire. Eric Bischoff, the former head of WCW, was named the Raw General Manager in July of 2002. We hear from Bischoff, who talked about how he thought his career in wrestling was over after the closure of WCW, with how he kind of took shots at WWE, tried to take their talent and everything else. But Vince called him up and said, hey, we want to bring you in as the on-air authority figure for Monday Night Raw. And he was like, absolutely. And some people backstage weren't happy to see him, not just the fans, but a lot of people backstage who had a history with Bischoff from WCW. Some people were indifferent toward it. Not Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan absolutely loved it. He actually said here in this documentary, he said, yeah, Bischoff was my boy. I loved seeing him in WWE, blah, blah, blah. It was whatever. Stephanie also talked about how she was able to help with Bischoff as the GM because she was kind of the rival to Bischoff over on SmackDown. She became the on-air authority figure over on SmackDown, the GM on the Blue Brand, while Bischoff ran Raw. So it was a nice balance there. But they admitted they made a mistake. They made a few mistakes when they first split up the rosters because there was a definite imbalance there for a little while, that Raw had far more star power than SmackDown and vice versa. At certain points. It was more so Raw that got the better of SmackDown, usually. And, for example, Rock was drafted to SmackDown. didn't even matter because he was never there. He took time off to go film movies, so there was a definite imbalance there. They needed to fix that, which is why they had trades go on in the remainder of 2002. For example, Paul Heyman really wanted Eddie Guerrero. He saw potential in Eddie, so he traded away Jericho and the Un-Americans. The Un-Americans, I guess, were a really hot heel tag team at the time. Jericho is a very well-established former world champion. People laughed. Not just fans, but like the decision makers, they laughed at his decision to take Eddie over Jericho and the Un-Americans. Because he saw star power in Eddie. He wanted to build around Eddie on the SmackDown brand. And it wasn't like they could just do trades. I mean, obviously they had to sell it to Vince. They talked about that. And Vince was like, oh, okay, I see the potential in Jericho. I see the potential in the Un-Americans. I have no issue with this, because if it benefited Raw, then he didn't mind. Because he didn't really give a shit about SmackDown, let's face it. And Vince, we actually see the press conference that they showed clips of earlier at the very beginning of the episode when he was talking about how, oh, it's important to take a half step back, blah, blah, blah. They show other highlights from that press conference, and Vince outright says, I want to do crossovers. I want to do trades. I want to make it feel like the brands are feuding, blah, blah, blah. Listen, I agree. I like when there's an actual rivalry between the two brands, or three brands if you include NXT now. I like that. The issue is when you have people showing up on each show and doing the trades and the crossovers and the ba-ba-ba, it becomes too much. I agree that, yeah, it's a big moment when it happens. When you do it every goddamn fucking week, it gets to a point where nobody cares. And I feel like that mindset that he has about that still exists today. I feel like he still has that mindset. We still see people pop up on shows randomly for no rhyme or reason. We had the draft 3 or 4 months ago. Sami Zayn, a SmackDown superstar, showed up on Raw for absolutely no reason like less than a month later. What the fuck was the point of that? It took them all of 2 weeks to put a SmackDown star on Raw. And they had Survivor Series, and they mingled the rosters, and it worked out with NXT. But no one gave a shit about Raw or SmackDown feuding with each other, because we had seen it so many times before in recent years, and at any other time of the year, they don't care. They don't care about that brand supremacy storyline. And I'm not saying I need to see it all the time, but they would show up on each other's shows, no real rhyme or reason why people would switch brands. Matt Hardy was doing that up until recently, up until he left. Not that it's his fault, it's the writing team. Like, he obviously loves the idea of doing crossovers. And listen, dude, that's fine. But when you do it so frequently, it gets to a point where it doesn't mean anything. And they didn't talk about that here. That's why the brand split failed, moreover than anything else, in my opinion. Not only were they not really seeing, not only was it not reaping benefits, which they talked how so much that it was. And yeah, trust me, it was in terms of the star power and whatnot. It definitely was. But in terms of the ratings, the live attendance, I'm sure it was fine. It was not what they were doing in the Attitude Era. That was my biggest issue with this episode, was that they glossed over a lot of the bad parts of the brand split. And listen, I'm the biggest proponent of the brand split. I guess that's one way of making a mockery of it. But anyway, I'm the biggest advocate of the brand extension, the brand split. But you got to acknowledge the issues with it. You have to. Why do you think it failed? Because they got lazy with it. In theory, it's a great idea, and absolutely it could work. But we're at a point in wrestling now where it doesn't matter where we realistically, have a brand split or not. I think it helps creatively. Ratings-wise, it's not going to make a lick of a difference. I mean, maybe a little bit, but they were talking so much about how, ratings were flourishing. They really weren't, though. Yeah, maybe compared to today's numbers, no doubt, but compared to the Attitude Era, not really. I mean, they were staying steady for the most part, but they definitely were not going up to doing the numbers they were doing before. So I don't know where that comment came from. And I mean, Bruce Pritchard is like the king of bullshit, so I'm not really surprised. But still, I just thought that was ridiculous. They brought up a lot of good points, and I agree. I love the brand split and the pros of it, but you got to mention the cons too, and how doing the crossover so often would water it down. It gets to a point where no one gives a fuck about seeing this guy appear on that show, because we see it so often it doesn't mean anything. You got to stay true to it, and they didn't stay true to it more often than not, at least past 2005. They got to 2005, and they're like, oh, we're done here with this documentary. I'm like, no, there's well more to this shit than what you guys are covering, so that kind of pissed me off. Anyway, getting back to what we were talking about before, the WWE Championship became exclusive to SmackDown in late 2002. What does Raw do? It debuts its own World Championship. I feel like they should have gone more in-depth with that. I feel like they only kind of recap stuff here and didn't really give any new insight. I mean, they did in other episodes of this show, which is weird. What's weird is that they didn't really do it with this episode. Raw got the World Heavyweight Championship. Big whoop. Why, though? Why did WWE feel a need to no longer have a traveling champion? Why did they have 2 world titles? I like the idea of 2 world titles, but what was their mindset behind that? They don't talk about that at all. They didn't discuss that whatsoever. They talked about how Triple H was awarded the World Heavyweight Championship for some odd reason, and that was it. They don't talk any more about that. They move right the hell on, which is very bizarre. The perception of these shows, of Raw and SmackDown at this point, was that they were far from equal, and that they had a lot of great talent, but SmackDown was clearly the B show. I mean, this, again, is obvious. Does that really need to be talked about on this episode? I mean, that much was obvious. Raw was alive, and that was always where Vince's focus was going to be. Eric Bischoff had a great analogy where he was like, the second person to ever land on the moon will never be nearly as celebrated as the first man to land on the moon because he was the first one to do it. He's been around longer. They both made it, but one person can only do it first, and Raw's been around a lot longer than SmackDown. So Raw will always be, and will forever be. I don't care what fucking network SmackDown's on. I don't care who's on the show. SmackDown will never be the A show. I think that's clear now. People were, oh my God, SmackDown is going to be the A show now that it's on Fox. Is it really, though? The show, first of all, sucks. Second of all, the ratings are not nearly as high as they were expecting or hoping for or whatever. SmackDown is barely that much better. Creatively, it's worse. In terms of how it's portrayed, yeah, they're getting a lot more, advertisement, and promotion during the football games and all this other stuff being on Fox. How long is that really going to last? Until Fox realizes, oh, this really wasn't worth the investment. Let's pull the plug and put them on FS1. So, anyway, SmackDown, the bottom line is that it will forever be the B show. I don't care what anyone says. In Vince's mind, it'll be forever the B show until Vince dies or whatever, and someone else takes over, and maybe they'll put more effort into SmackDown. And putting it on a new network is not going to solve that problem. I mean, yeah, it's on a bigger platform than it was before. Creatively, though, it still sucks. And they barely have any star power on that show. And no, I don't count the occasional appearances from the Bellas or NWO or Hulk Hogan. That shit doesn't count. I'm talking about actual star power from the current roster. We have Roman Reigns, Daniel Bryan, Bray Wyatt, and everyone else I could give 2 shits about. Bayley's terribly booked. Braun Strowman, I don't give 2 shits about. Shinsuke Nakamura, I don't give 2 shits about. And the show it just sucks. I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but I mean, just to kind of illustrate the point they were talking about here about how SmackDown was the B show. And it is, and it will forever be the B show. Vince doesn't give a fuck about SmackDown, and he never will. Mick Foley, for one, was a Raw guy. He loved the fact that it was alive. Paul Heyman was really, really, really adamant about making Raw the B show. He wanted to have, Michael Cole and Taz feel like they were going to war with Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross and really talk shit about him on his show. He wanted to make Raw SmackDown's bitch. Those were his exact words. SmackDown was more of a wrestling show. Raw was more of the entertainment promo show. And Heyman was one of those people because of what he did with Cole and Taz and others. He liked stirring the pot. SmackDown's mentality, even more so than Raw, I feel like, because SmackDown was just putting on the better show, and that's not even an opinion. It's a fact. That's an absolute fact. SmackDown was far superior to Raw at this point. They really wanted to crush Raw in the ratings. We hear from Shelton Benjamin who had said that. Wrestlers on both brands, but specifically SmackDown, wanted the higher attendance. They wanted the higher merchandise sales. They wanted everything. They actually wanted the ratings, which I did not know, for a good stretch of time there from late 02, maybe mid 02, up until early 03. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but I feel like it would be weird if they lied about that when there's actual facts to back that up. But I guess SmackDown wanted the ratings for quite some time there from late 02 to early 2003. And SmackDown's mentality was, we want to be the better brand. And it created real competition between the 2 locker rooms. But there was no time to celebrate. It's a weekly show, so even if SmackDown won the ratings, they would have to go right into producing their next show. No time, no rest for the weary. No time to celebrate here. SmackDown was consistently good, and we see this great interview. It's kind of like a a segment, an excerpt of a longer interview with Kevin Kelly and Vince McMahon on the Bite This show. I think it was Bite This. Kevin Kelly brings up how SmackDown at this point, I don't know when this is from, late 02, early 03, was consistently good. Raw had its very good weeks and very bad weeks. I feel like that's the case today. I mean, SmackDown sucks, but I feel like that's the case today, just reversed. And Vince is talking about this. He's like, yeah, you're right. I agree. SmackDown is the better show. Raw will sometimes be really, really good. And then some other times it'll be really, really bad. Like, ugh, that's a bad show. It's like, dude, you write this shit. Like, he's actually admitting that the shows suck, which I guess is good. But at the same time, it's like, I feel like he's talking about, like, The Walking Dead. Like, oh, some episodes are better than others. Like, you control this stuff. Like, that's your fault. Yeah, there's different writing teams and different talent pools. But at the end of the day, you have final say on everything. So why is Raw so much worse than SmackDown? Not now, but at this point, And SmackDown was almost always consistently good. I feel like people kind of look back at the Ruthless Aggression era, as great as it was, and it's one of my favorite eras in wrestling history, if you want to call it an era or whatever. I fucking hate the era shit. It's just all one timeline. You can kind of separate it by, like, the Attitude Era I get, because there were two opposing companies. Beyond that, and maybe the Ruthless Aggression era, there's no more eras. There's no PG era. There's no reality era. There's no more fucking eras. That's it. There may be the WWE Network era for pay-per-views. That's it. But anyway, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, with Raw. How Raw was so much better back then. Listen, they had a lot of good shows. There was a lot of shit on those shows too. So don't think, oh, Raw was so much better back then than it is today. Yeah, Raw today is by no means perfect. But it definitely had its flaws, a lot like today's show does. It's really no different. The only difference is the ratings and how abysmal they are. And Raw, for the last couple years, has been far worse overall than it was 10, 15 years ago. But nowadays, I would say it's fairly equal. For all the great stuff they were doing back then with Triple H and Michaels and Evolution, they're doing just as much good stuff, if not more good stuff, today than they were back then. So again, let's not look back at that time period with rose-colored glasses here, thinking it was all fine and dandy and great stuff. It was all peaches and roses and whatnot. Anyway, so the success of both brands led to the return, or rather the debut, because that had never been done before. The debut, the creation of brand-exclusive pay-per-views and live events, since they only ran one night out of the week for their live shows for each brand, that they can go out and do brand-exclusive live events, which they did for a long time after that. Stone Cold Steve Austin returning to Raw in February of 2003 at the No Way Out pay-per-view really helped, boosting Raw's quality there for a while. Both brands had established identities, established stars, but at the same time, they needed new stars to step up. So, that was what led to the rise of Eddie Guerrero. He had always had the talent, but he never had that opportunity. Until the brand split, he got that opportunity to rise to the top as a main event star during the brand split. He was the tag team guy, he was the U.S. champion. He might have been, I feel like he was the first U.S. champion when they brought that belt back in 03. It was either him or Benoit. I feel like it was Eddie. Either way, he was very well respected. The locker room, not just the fans, but the locker room was ready for Eddie to be the guy. They were ready for him to be the locker room leader at that point. And Eddie, we hear from Batista and so many other people who talk about Kurt Angle. They talk about how he could control a crowd. Eddie Guerrero, that is. He could control a crowd better than anyone. He could be loved one second and hated the next. He was just so good at what he did. That led to him becoming the WWE champion by February of 2004. And the idea behind it was that he appealed to an all-new demographic, like that Latino demographic that WWE has been searching for ever since Rey Mysterio left. And he's been back now for a couple years, but they've been really desperately looking for a new Latino star. They tried with Del Rio, it failed. Not that it was entirely Del Rio's fault, how they booked him really didn't help with that either. They made a lot of questionable booking decisions with Del Rio, but they tried with Del Rio, it didn't work. They tried with Sin Cara, it didn't work. They tried with Kalisto, it didn't work. A lot of different people, they've tried to make that next big Latino star, and it's never really worked. But it worked with Eddie, it worked with Rey, and hopefully, I think Angel Garza can be that guy, in my opinion. That's besides the point. What they illustrate here, what they explain, is that not only was he appealing to that demographic, he was appealing to every demographic because he was so goddamn good. People loved Eddie Guerrero. But they needed a new heel to take the title off Eddie by the summer of 2004, so they looked to Bradshaw, a.k.a. JBL. He became a single star around this point. He heard the doubters, and he wanted to prove them wrong and make it work, and that's exactly what he did. You don't have to be a JBL fan to admit that the guy was a success. The character worked. He had no redeeming qualities. He was a great heel. They needed someone to oppose Eddie, and it worked. He won the championship from him in the summer of 2004, and he reigned over SmackDown for almost an entire year. Maybe not the greatest period in SmackDown's history, and the matches weren't the best, and his booking was questionable, but they made a new star in JBL, and subsequently John Cena, when he took that championship from Eddie, about a year later at WrestleMania 21. So, meanwhile, they talk about all the stars that rose up on Raw, including, but not limited to, Randy Orton, the entire Evolution stable, Batista. The women were headlining Raw, Trish and Lita. They really elevated that division. Cena rose up on SmackDown, as I mentioned, won the championship. He actually went to Raw in the draft in 2005, as they recap here, which sent Batista over to SmackDown as the World Heavyweight Champion. Edge became a star when he cashed in Money in the Bank. Booker T and Rey Mysterio won their first WWE World Heavyweight Championships on SmackDown during this period. And to close it out, we hear from various people who talked about how the rosters, they competed with each other, but at the end of the day, there was still that camaraderie there. There was still a trust between the two rosters that they can go out there and get the job done and put on the best show they possibly could. We hear from Big Show, who talked about how that was one of the more enjoyable periods of his entire career. And then Batista just said it was fun. And we hear from Paul Heyman to close it out, who said that, I don't know where WWE would be now without the brand split creation the first time around 20 years ago. But I will say this, that by having it, we definitely benefited from the brand split. And I absolutely agree. I mean, it's not perfect, and that's largely because of how they've executed it, Vince McMahon. But overall, I think they've done a very good job with it, and it's created far more stars than not. So props to them for that. But like I said, there were a lot of issues with this documentary here. They really did not get in anything I didn't already know, and probably you as well. I would be surprised if there was a lot of stuff on the show that you didn't already know. If you're watching the show, you probably already know 90% of what they were talking about, because it's been pretty common knowledge here for a while. We hear from some cool people. They bring in Batista and Christian and Big Show and Mick Foley, a lot of different people. Brian Gewirtz, Bruce Pritchard, as he's been in every fucking episode so far. I feel like, again, he's just a major league bullshitter. He knows a lot of stuff, but I feel like he kind of fabricates some of his stories to make himself seem like the good guy. I don't know. I'm not a big... I mean, I like Bruce Pritchard, but a lot of his stories seem to be very bullshit. And the fact that he's writing SmackDown right now, reportedly, says a lot, because the show's been terrible since he took over. Anyway, I thought this was a good but not great episode of the Ruthless Aggression show. Not exactly the hottest note to end on before the rest of the series comes back in the fall. I feel like there was just so much more they could have gotten into. Why did it fail? Why did they do certain things the wrong way? Did they not want to admit that it was a failure? I mean, yeah, it worked. I think overall I would call the brand split a success. But it failed for a reason. Not because of anything that the talent did, but rather the writing teams, and specifically Vince McMahon. He caused it to fail, which is why they did away with it years later in 2008, 09, 2010, 2011. They had to bring it back 5 years later because they felt like they needed it. And it worked out. And again, I like the brand split, but they are far from the right people to do it. Specifically Vince, because he's never really truly taken it seriously. You'll see people still to this fucking day show up on each other's shows for no rhyme or reason. It doesn't mean anything. We've seen it so often over the last 2 decades that it means nothing at this point. The idea of another draft coming up after Mania is laughable. Fucking laughable. That would be the 3rd shakeup in the last year. They did one after Mania last year. It was a joke. It was terribly handled, poorly executed. They did the draft again in the fall when SmackDown went to Fox, and that was also terribly executed. And now they're going to do another one? Why? Who needs to switch brands? Who needs to switch shows? Nobody. I feel like they're barely getting enough out of the shows they have right now. SmackDown might need some help, but they don't need to do another shakeup. I think that's just laughable, to be honest with you. I think it's way too soon. Just wait until late next year, or the following year, whatever. From 2002 to 2004, yeah, people switched brands, but they never held the draft. For 2 years, they never held the draft. From 2002, when they separated the roster, 2003, as far as I know, never had a draft. 2004 did, and that was it. They didn't do another one until 2005. 2006 didn't really have a draft. And 2007, by then, it became a regular thing. But it goes to show you don't need to have a draft every year because it doesn't change anything. The rosters will sometimes change. Yeah, the faces on what shows you're watching, but the creative definitely doesn't. That's an issue that starts at the top, not with the talent, not with which show they're on. I think it helps in certain cases. Certain people benefit from being on certain shows. But other than that, though, the real issue is with the writing teams, and they should have fucking talked about that here, because that was a big problem. So honestly, I was a little disappointed by this episode. I thought it was good. I enjoyed it. But at only 40 minutes in length, it flies by. But it's everything we already know. And again, I'm kind of disappointed that they're waiting until the fall to air the rest of the series. I guess it keeps you subscribed, I guess. And it makes you wanting more. But this wasn't a great episode to really end on. To close it out, though, they did show that video promoting the rest of the season. It's about like a minute and a half long. So among the topics they're going to discuss in the fall include, I guess, some sort of Brothers of Destruction episode. We hear from Taker. He's in like regular street clothes, which is cool. He kind of talks about being a locker room leader and the lack of effort he was seeing in the roster at the time. We hear from Kane. So I guess they either talk about their feud in early 04 or just their tag team. It seems kind of random. But that's an episode, I suppose. They definitely talk about Tough Enough. They definitely talk about the Diva Search. I forgot what the other topics consisted of, but definitely Tough Enough, definitely the Diva Search, among other things. It looks like it has some promise. They talk about, we hear from Edge about something. I don't remember what it was. They kind of talk more about like shows and shit like that than they do anything else. I don't know. It has potential. But I am disappointed that they're waiting until the fall to air the rest of it. I guess that's, standard stuff for any television show. But like 6 to 7 months is a long time. So I don't know. I guess we'll figure it out as we go along. But I thought this was all right. No real reason to watch this one over the other ones. Keep up with it. But I would say the Evolution one was by far the best. I thought that one was the best one. The Brock one was good. That wasn't exactly newsworthy, but it was better than this. This was probably the weakest of the 5 so far. The first one was good. The second one on Cena I thought was great. That was probably my second favorite behind the Evolution one. But anyway, thank you guys as always for checking out my reviews of these videos. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content. We'll be back on tomorrow? I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if there's anything new airing after all tonight on the network. There might be, and if so, I'll be breaking down whatever tomorrow. If not, I'll be putting up some random videos, so keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, guys, have a great rest of your week. Be sure to, again, stay subscribed for more daily content. I will be gone on vacation, on a mini vacation in California from Friday to next Wednesday. So in terms of, I know there's like a new Day Of going up. There's a new Broken Skull Sessions going up in the time that I'm away. I don't know if I'm bringing my mic. I don't know if I'll be able to record. Probably not. So I might just wait until I get back to record. We'll see. And if that's the case, I'll just put up some random miscellaneous content while I'm away. Definitely no SmackDown review. I will not make time to watch SmackDown and review it on Saturday. The show's been that bad. I'm away. Who gives a fuck? The other stuff we'll see. But anyway, have a great one, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.